Today we're discussing volume of three-dimensional figures, and specifically we're talking about prisms. Now before we can move on to volume, we have to understand what a cubic unit is. And I know you guys have talked about volume in the past, but I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. That a cubic unit, up until now we've talked about square units. So just one unit measures length. A square unit measures the area of something. There's two dimensions, a length and a width, right? And then the cubic unit adds that height dimension to it. So it's 1 unit in length, 1 unit in width, and 1 unit in height. And so what we're measuring with volume is how many of these cubic units will fit in one figure, in this figure. So we're going to be measuring and figuring out using a formula how many cubic units will fit inside one three-dimensional figure. So go ahead and take a minute, make sure you have all of those formulas or all those definitions written down, and then we are going to move on to talk about the formula for volumes of prisms. So the volume of a prism is capital B times H. And the capital B represents the area of the base. Now if you have a rectangular prism, it's a little different because the area of the base could be any of the rectangles because they're double-sided and things. However, if you have a triangular prism, it's the area of the triangle multiplied by the height. Because really what you're looking at, so for instance, if I had a triangular prism, what the volume is saying is if I have that top triangle, and I keep cutting this thing in slices of that top triangle, I've taken that same triangle and just layered it a whole bunch of times going down this direction. So it's that same triangle times the height, times the number of units going down it is. Right? So that's why it's the area of this times the height. Now if I have a rectangular prism, if I have a rectangular prism like this, I mean, you could call the base the top of it, but notice you could really go any direction because they're all rectangles. So for this, the volume for a rectangular prism is always going to be length times width times height. And I'm pretty sure you guys, that's the formula you guys are familiar with because you've mentioned it already when we're talking about area and other things. So I know that you guys are familiar with that volume is length times width times height. So for rectangular prisms, it's that in general. It's just the area of the base times the height. So let's take a look at an example or two to see how we'll make this work. So example number 1, the picture they show is a fish tank. I'm not going to draw the whole fish tank, I'm just going to draw you kind of the prism that would represent. So not perfect, but we have 10 inches as our width. We have a height of 12 inches. And we have a length of 20 inches. So not a very big fish tank. But we're curious how many... So you want to fill this, right? We need to fill a fish tank with water. We need to know how many cubic inches of water is going to fit inside this tank. Well, with a rectangular prism, we just have to look at length times width times height. we just multiply those three together and we're going to get our answer. So we're going to take our length, which is 20, times the width, which is 10, times the height, which is 12. So 20 times 10 is going to be 200, times 12, well 12 times 2 is 24, add in that 0, and we have 240, and now it's inches cubed. So it's 3, because there's 3 dimensions that go into that figure. It's your length, your width, and your height. So 240 cubic inches is how we would say and write that. So not too hard, right? Let's do another one. So let's take a look. So this one they're going to give us in words. So they're going to not draw us a picture to do it, but they're going to give us the words. So it says, find the volume of a rectangular prism with a height of 10 meters, length of 8 meters, and width of 7 meters. So again, rectangular prism indicates that we're doing length times width times height. My length is 8, my width is 7, and my height is 10. Well, 8 times 7 is 56, times 10, 560, we're in meters. Again, it's cubic meters. So not very hard here when we're looking at rectangular prisms. So this formula will be the one that will be most important. Again, it'll be one of those ones that I'm going to give you. I will not make you memorize this. You will have to memorize this eventually in your math career, but not until you get later on in things. So we're going to stop there. We could talk about triangular prisms and some other prisms, but I think we'll talk about that in class instead. And so our next video will focus on the surface area, and eventually we'll talk about the volume of cylinders, which we know are prisms, but with circular faces and bases instead of rectangular or triangular other shapes.